Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Friday, October 6th, 2017. Time for another show, another Friday. We made it again, but of course, Friday, no respite any longer during the Trump era. Sometimes this is exactly when things begin to heat up. But Daily Co's Radio is live now. That ought to help a little bit anyway. Bill reminds us from Portland, Maine. Why is Puerto Rico putting up, oh my goodness, can I even say, I mean, I guess I can. Do we have Spanish speakers listening to the radio all over the place? I mean, what's the word on FCC policing of foreign language dirty words, I guess, essentially? Can we do that? I mean, there's posters all over Puerto Rico, and they say a thing, and I don't know, I guess we could, who knows? We'll go find out. Do we risk it all for Rochester Free Radio, or what? Pendejo? Can you go ahead and just, I mean, we're going to say it, and then we can just spell it. Yes, that's it. That's the excellent answer. Of course, I just spelled it by reading the letters together in rapid sequence is all I was doing. Anyway, that's what the posters say, and you might as well go and grab one and do so quickly. Scott Charles, of course, had a great time with that one, saying he was going to race out and quick. He'll be right back, coming back from the Patent and Trademark Office to trademark a brand new brand of paper towels for sale down in Puerto Rico. Maybe Armando might want to take advantage of the opportunity to come on, and I guess he could just say that word over and over again until we find out what the FCC thinks of it. But I know midweek he had some thoughts about coming on and discussing the Puerto Rico situation and how things are going down there. Doors open to that, of course. We also have episode 5. It's getting like the Star Wars thing here of Paula Appanese is continuing series comparing quite aptly, I think, Republicans as a party, the GOP, the GOP, if you will, to domestic abusers. A lot of good feedback on that one, and I'm pleased to have that. We're nearing the end of the series. It's winding down. I know it's sad. It's like everyone coming to the season finale, but we'll take it over the weekend into next week, so you won't go without. Don't worry. It's not all ending just yet. What is happening this morning? What has got people shaking in their boots that's happening in the White House, et cetera, et cetera? I don't even really know exactly what this was about, but last night the word was, hey, Trump will kill us all and it may happen tomorrow. What are we talking about? I have a HuffPost piece here that sort of explains it. Nick Visser has this one. In a bizarre photo op, Trump tells the press, this is the calm before the storm. No one knows what kind of storm is coming up, but that's what Trump loves to screw around with dumb stuff. You guys know what this represents? Trump asked the reporters. He was lining up for photographs with top military brass and their spouses, I believe, in the photos. And well, here's the report. The White House summoned the media to a last-minute photo op on Thursday evening, during which President Donald Trump made a series of cryptic comments. They're all cryptic because he's a bumbling dotard. All comments from Donald Trump are cryptic. Okay? Anyway, he made another series of cryptic comments while surrounded by, quote, the world's great military people. He knows more than all of them, of course. I know the generals are idiots, but here I am taking my picture with them because why not? All right. Let's see. The short photo spray, as they like to call it, lasted about a minute. There's some videotape of it. The freeze frame of the videotape looks like Donald Trump is going in for a little golden nugget up his nose there, but who knows what he's after. Trump says maybe it's the calm before the storm. What storm, Mr. President? You'll find out. Loves to tease about stuff like, oh, I don't know, maybe global thermonuclear war, maybe not. So thanks a lot for making everybody so secure. What's the storm? A reporter asked. Iran? ISIS? What? We have the world's great military people, Trump replied. Thank you all for coming. That's his whole response. So who knows what to think about that? I don't know. We'll find out. Here's a tweet embedded in here from Justin Sink. It says, so the White House broke a lid to summon us for a photo op with Trump and military. Then things got weird. What does that mean? That's I guess, insider jargony talk. The lid, I guess, is if you are working at the White House and you want to go home. It's the end of the day. It maybe is, 7:30 in the evening. You'd like to think your day is over. The White House, a White House that isn't a lying bunch of a-holes, will tell you, all right, the lid is, we're putting a lid on the day. The day's news is over. We don't expect anything else to go on. A conscientious reporter covering events at the White House can honestly say at this point, there's likely nothing else happening here. I should go home to my family. But this White House broke that lid. And I mean, it happens from time to time. It's an emergency situation. Something just came up. We absolutely have to have, you'll want to know about this. You won't want to leave. Well, they broke the lid. Don't go yet. We got one more event. They said it was all over, but then it turned out not to be. And what was it? Come in for taking pictures of me with the world's great military people. Okay, that's nice and all, and I'll take the pictures, but why? This could be the calm before the storm, so to speak. Really? What storm are you talking about? You'll find out. Now it's a lid. Now you should go home. And of course, at that point, no one can go and no one can sleep. So, well, what a fun guy this idiot president is. He makes every day a challenge. And of course, this weekend will be no different. Man, what a bunch of losers. I hate these guys. I don't know what else to say. Let's see. Also this morning, Trump attempting to insert himself into the Virginia gubernatorial race between Democratic candidate Ralph Northam and Republican operative and their nominee, Ed Gillespie, who, just to sort of update the situation, I haven't been watching, all super closely. It's happening in my neighborhood. I'm aware of it. I'm going to vote. I know what I'm doing. I've been reading a little bit about it, but I haven't been super involved in the race. But, Gillespie, I guess, secured the nomination largely because he's seen widely as an establishment Republican figure. He was head of the party nationally and in Virginia, and he's run for office in Virginia before. He's lost every time, but he's seen as he's a conservative guy, but more or less mainstream. And he defeated a more Trumpist jackass of a candidate, essentially, on the strength of I won't embarrass you like Donald Trump or this guy. And he won the nomination and then immediately, of course, realized, well, in order to win Trump's base, such as it is, in order to win in this race, I'm going to need every Republican-leaning, conservative-leaning voter I can get. And the way to do that is to be more Trumpy. And so, of course, most of the campaign in the general, the pivot, interestingly, has been not to the center, but back out to the fringe. And he's run a pretty racist Trump-style campaign since then. But he's benefited from the fact that most people aren't interested in the race and aren't paying attention. And they just say, oh, yeah, Ed Gillespie, that regular Republican guy. Trump has inserted himself into the race this time around, of course, to tweet Trumpish things, including this morning insisting that Ralph Northam, because he's the Democrat and because he is favorably inclined toward allowing the practice of sanctuary in sanctuary cities. He's in favor of MS-13, their new boogeyman, the MS-13, the gang that's running rampant all over America. Apparently, FarmersOnly.com world believes that every city larger than Mayberry is overrun by gangs and gang warfare, and in particular, MS-13. It sounds a little bit like a machine gun, so maybe that's why they like that gang so much. But yeah, that's their racist dog whistle, and Trump has shown up to blow it, as he often does. He shows up and blows everything. That guy really blows a lot, as they used to say about Governor Sam Brownback out in Kansas. He has the same problem, this idiot dotard in the White House. We are stuck with that. Anyway, let's see. Bill also mentioning about that stupid press photo opportunity. For some reason, Trump's White House pics always make the Oval Office look like a fake movie set, and they do. He's emptied the place out. It's a little weird the way it's laid out, and that desk sitting there and the gold curtains, and it all looks rather fake. And I wish it was. And it may be possible to move him to another location at some point, like shoot him with a tranquilizer dart and move him to another location decorated like the movie set Oval Office he keeps, and just keep him in there and say, you can't go out because you did it, Mr. President. You finally covered the world in acid rain. It's just too dangerous for you to go out. No more golf, but you do get to sit here and watch television. And he'll just think he's still president, and you'd have to fake it up. Maybe you'd have to kidnap the Fox and Friends crew too, and have them broadcast closed circuit directly to the television in the basement where you're keeping the president. That could work. I'm just spitballing here, and feel free to implement any plan you like. Anything we can do to help out here. All right. Well, let's see. Plenty of news stories to get to. I'll have to open up Pocket at some point and clear that out. Let's see. We can add. There are more names to add to the list of people who are taking charter flights around the country. I didn't grab this one? Really? Okay. Well, I did see tweeted this morning. We'll have to look this one up on the air while we're working on it. That now add Rick Perry, super genius, to the list of people taking strange or possibly unjustified charter flights, private charter flights around the country on official business. This one didn't sound so super terrible, but that's just maybe because it's early in the story, and we'll likely find out shortly that he's perhaps taken more flights than just this one. HuffPost has this. Oh, I'm sorry. I credit HuffPost because that's the website that comes up. Of course, they autoplay their video, so I have to be careful about that and turn down the volume. But it is a Reuters story. That's just one of the more annoying practices I find of HuffPost and many websites around the country that they're just news aggregators. We're aggregating. You're just stealing credit essentially for it. Oh yeah, we give credit to Reuters, but everybody thinks it's a HuffPost story. It's not. It is a Reuters story under the banner of HuffPost. That's what they do. That's what they've always done. I don't know why this surprises me. Rick Perry took chartered jet day before Price resigned. So in other words, the chartered jet issue was already a hot topic. But Mr. Super Genius Glasses Dancing with the Stars guy didn't understand what was going on and decided to hop on the flight. And I said it wasn't one of the worst ones because at least it was arguably he was leaving from an airport to which there are no commercial flights in and out. It's one of those small airports. But, well, you'll see in the story exactly what the situation is. Anyway, the situation is this, datelined New York for some reason. October 4th, U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry took a charter jet to Ohio last week, according to an airport management company, the day before his fellow cabinet member, Tom Price, resigned over his use of private charter flights for government business. Perry took the private plane from Hazleton Regional Airport in Pennsylvania. I think it's Hazleton rather than Hazleton, but I'm not 100% sure of that one. To the Greater Portsmouth Regional Airport in southern Ohio on September 28th. PMH Aviation, the company that runs the Portsmouth Airport, said on Wednesday. The purpose of his trip was to visit a uranium facility in Piketon, Ohio, according to the Energy Department, which I guess is part of the job. And he was leaving from, Pennsylvania, Hazleton. Who knows what's nearby? Well, of course, you could look it up. There's plenty of commercial airports you could have taken. But, it's a hassle to drive to another one. And, he's a busy guy, secretarian for all that energy and stuff. A receptionist at the company declined to answer questions about the cost of the flight. The only private jet to land at Greater Portsmouth Regional Airport last Thursday belonged to Dixie Capital Corporation, a Richmond, Virginia-based charter company, according to data from the FlightAware website. Dixie confirmed it owned the plane but declined to comment on Perry or say how much the trip cost. A spokeswoman for Perry did not immediately respond to a request for comment. During a stop in Pennsylvania, Perry had toured a coal mine, because you got to figure out what's going on inside those coal mines, because energy. No commercial airlines serve Hazleton, but airports with commercial routes in Scranton and Allentown, Pennsylvania are each an hour away. Lehigh Valley International Airport. As a matter of fact, Price resigned last week as U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary, yada, yada. You know that story. Ryan Zinke also in trouble. Now Rick Perry pulled into this. It's not the most egregious abuse of charter flights I've ever seen, but Rick Perry is a habitual high flyer anyway. While he was governor of Texas, he definitely took advantage of private charter flights all the time. They were usually gifted to him as freebies by businessmen who owned the planes. I first became aware of the FlightAware website in tracking him when he was a Republican candidate for president. He used those. Everybody does that when they're a candidate for president. They take somebody else's charter plane. It's just one of the fun and legal ways in which we can bribe our elected officials and candidates, and everyone loves to take advantage of it. Democrats too, but it is a little strange how much of his Trump's cabinet continues to do the same thing while in office. That's the unusual part. Steve Mnuchin back in the news and back in HuffPost, as a matter of fact, over his flights. Their headline, and this is genuinely their headline, Rebecca Shapiro writing the piece for HuffPost. Steve Mnuchin has cost taxpayers $800,000 for travel on military planes. So the second of the cabinet to rack up nearly $1 million in special flight costs. In a matter of months, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin managed to cost American taxpayers more than $800,000 for travel aboard military aircraft, yet apparently he broke no laws, an official government inquiry found. You're off the hook, sir. The decision came on the heels of HHS Secretary Tom Price Tagg's resignation from office. Price stepped down after Politico reported on the cabinet member's frequent use of chartered and military flights. You know all about it. It topped more than $1 million. 5 of those chartered flights occurred during the same week and were used for domestic travel between cities ranging from Washington, D.C. to Waterville, Maine. Did you know he was up your way? Maine in general is, of course, your way, Bill. I don't know whether Waterville is anywhere close to where you are. But if so, boy, are you lucky. The reported details of Mnuchin's military aircraft travel since March were similarly lavish. He flew on a military flight to meet with President Trump at Trump Tower in New York, a round trip that cost $15,000, according to the New York Times. Politico says cabinet members' travel aboard military aircraft is approved by the White House on a case-by-case basis and is sometimes necessary for cabinet members dealing with national security. The Times cited an internal email that said Mnuchin needed a military plane in order to have a classified telephone conversation with Secretary of State Rex Everything Tillerson. In another case, Mnuchin cost taxpayers $43,725.50 to fly to Miami for a meeting with the Mexican finance minister, because Miami is, of course, in Mexico. A commercial round-trip flight would have cost less than $1,000. Still, the Treasury's Office of the Inspector General found that Mnuchin's use of military aircraft on 7 official trips broke no laws, but asked the Secretary to provide more justifications for such travel in the future. Essentially, if the White House can approve them on a case-by-case basis, the White House can also give a blanket approval and just say every case by case which you bring to my attention, I will simply approve, and that'll be it. Okay, so that's how you handle laws in this administration. I have the right to approve them on a case-by-case basis? Okay, fine. Bring them to me and I'll say, they're approved. The end. Okay. What else is in the news? Everything. How shall we get around to it? Oh, look at this. Here's something we can read. Paul Waldman, no relation, in case you were ever wondering. Well, no relation that I know of, anyway. Writes for the week. Okay, I'll say it. We should ban almost all guns, he says in the week. Let's go find out what that has to do with anything and why he decided to do that. Armando, I'm sure, agrees. I wonder whether it has anything to do with the fact that almost all guns can fire just the same way that the Las Vegas shooters' guns can. A point I've been trying to make over Twitter and on yesterday's show. Oh, I know. I disappointed Daily Kos user and longtime listener and super fan of the show, Enemy of the People, with yesterday's show. I feel bad about that because, longtime listener, and I don't want to disappoint anyone. But after all, Enemy of the People, can you be super disappointed about disappointing enemies of the people? He's not really. Maybe she, not really an enemy of the people. It's an ironic name. But a little too much time, in Enemy of the People's opinion, spent on the technicalities of the gun, bump firing thing. I thought I was doing everybody, a service. Sometimes service gets boring. It's true. It might have been too much. And gun minutia is so often the, excuse that gun nuts will use for quote unquote disqualifying everybody else from the conversation so that they don't have to talk about their guns. I just didn't want that to happen to people. I thought if you had a pretty good understanding of how the bump fire thing works, then you would understand, well, two things. One, how it works, and so that's good. So you can join the conversation and they can't rule you out. And two, this is, I think, one of the ways that Republican gun enthusiasts might try to either push us off of the emerging bipartisan consensus for a gun bump stock ban, and two, might help us avoid being outwitted on this bump stock ban. It's a real possibility that we could get hoodwinked in all this and end up adopting a ban that doesn't do very much of anything or is easily circumvented by simply inventing a differently shaped device that does the same thing. Or, of course, there will be arguments that Republicans make that, well, it doesn't matter whether you ban bump stocks. Bump firing is still possible with any semi-automatic weapon. And to me, I think that's actually pretty valuable. The point I was hoping to get around to making, maybe I forgot to make the point eventually, was that these guns off the shelf can do exactly what the guy in Las Vegas did. And so what that means is, yeah, if you're really serious about getting rid of the materials that make it possible to do what the guy in Las Vegas did, then you really need to be talking about eliminating semi-automatic weapons, and that really means wiping out the private market for guns in this country. Something that will make some people cheer, others shudder, others bite their nails, whatever. But yeah, the whole point of the exercise yesterday, to wind that up, is off the shelf, these guns can all do this, and it's been a big lie the whole time. The excuse from the NRA and other gun rights advocates has been, well, these things, we've outlawed automatic weapons. These things aren't automatic weapons, and so any infinite number of varieties of these things ought to be offered for sale for fun or sport or hunting and all kinds of any applications people want, essentially. But don't worry, because they're not machine guns. But really, they kind of are. And we should know that. And it may be too late to do anything about it. But let's see what Paul Waldman has to say about the situation. What's he got? Whenever America has one of its periodic mass shootings, like every 2 weeks, you can count on seeing this particular exchange played out on a cable news or in conversations across the country. The advocate for guns will say to the promoter of restrictions, "You just want to ban all guns," to which it is replied, "No, I don't. I just want some common sense regulation." In anticipation of this criticism, Democratic politicians will regularly begin their remarks on gun control by saying, "I support the Second Amendment and I'm not trying to ban guns. I just believe... So, since no one else wants to say it except Armando, Paul Waldman will. He says, yes, I'd like to ban guns, almost all of them, at least the ones in private hands. Now, before you begin penning your angry, threatening email to me, and so you know you won't be the first or even the 100th to communicate your friendly sentiments, let me be completely clear about what I'm not saying. Already he's hedging. What? Okay, first and most important, he says, I know that guns are not going to be banned, and I know that with around 300 million of them already in circulation, collecting them would be an impossible task, even if we tried, which we won't. I am fully aware of the Second Amendment and of how the Supreme Court decided for the first time in 2008 that it confers an individual right to own a gun. This isn't a realistic proposal for legislation. At times, however, it's worthwhile to step back from the concrete debates we're having, as important as those are, and spend a moment contemplating what kind of society we'd prefer if there were no practical impediments to radical change. If we could snap our fingers and create any situation we wanted to start over, what would we do? I'd suggest that if we were able to do that, we'd be much better off if we abandoned the absurd fetishism around guns that leaves us awash in so much blood and gore. America would simply be safer if we constructed our gun laws like one of our peer countries in Europe or Asia, in which private gun ownership is relatively rare and strictly regulated. To gun owners, let me make something else clear. I get it. I get that the hunting rifle your grandfather passed down to you gives you a strong and meaningful connection to him. And we ought to just pause and remind ourselves that that is true, and that there are gun-owning liberals among our audience and elsewhere who really feel that to be the case and are very strongly moved by our, so far, inability as Democrats to find language to approach the problem with which we can find some consensus with liberal and even conservative gun enthusiasts and gun owners who are nonetheless in favor of at least some common sense restrictions. I grant you that they do exist, and they're out there, and we need to find ways to talk to them. We'll continue with our consideration of this article, and perhaps we'll do so after our next upcoming break, because it is almost time for us to exit for station identification. Just sort of scanning down here to see whether there's anything innovative, interesting, and new, or whether this is simply just a confession that he'd like to ban all guns if that were possible. And you know what? I'm not seeing a lot of really great promise in this thing. We'll take care of it after the break, though. We'll be right back after station identification. Hi, everyone. We're back with more of the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio as our music plays its way out. Yeah, guns on the mind once again. I don't mean to ruin the whole show and make it about guns again. I don't want to disappoint anybody. But I think it's fair to talk about guns without getting into the minutia of how they work necessarily. But, there's a couple of stories that sort of reminded me of exactly what it is we are dealing with here. And in addition to the inherent danger of even semi-automatic weapons, I guess, we'll pop over to some specific examples each day, pretty much. I share these gun fail stories with you. A little less. I've been falling off on sharing them. I'm trying to collect them. I'm trying to make sure that I have everything and get my back collection together before I begin publishing the stories again. These, events and the craziness of the Trump administration and just craziness of life in general sometimes overwhelms me, and I'm unable to keep up with the publication schedule, but I like to keep records of the gun fails that are out there. But on a daily basis, I'll be tweeting some around and sharing ones that others share with me, like SFDB on Twitter, who collects these kinds of stories all the time and shares them with me, and I share them in turn with you, along with the gun fail hashtag. Just a routine one that happened that I got word of this morning. Nothing remarkable about it, but I guess that's what makes it all so remarkable, is that they aren't in themselves remarkable situations. It's just something that happens daily, and we pretend like it's a rare event. This one reported by the Miami Herald. When he reached to calm his crying son, the headline reads, his gun fell and fired a deadly shot, police say. Jared Gilmore reporting for McClatchy Papers. It's running in the Miami Herald here, I guess because it's a local story. No, it happened in Pennsylvania. I guess they're just really interested in guns down in Miami, and good on them. That's an important thing. This happens in Pennsylvania. It typically gets reported as a local story of regional interest at most, and it doesn't get national attention. And it's almost hard to, see how it possibly could, because your paper would be full of these stories and nothing else all day long, every day. But maybe that would be a good consciousness-raising exercise. Anyway, McClatchy covered this one. I happen to have the Miami Herald's run of it. His son was crying in the backseat of the car, but when Kenneth Morris, 28, all of 28 years old, tried to reach into the vehicle's rear driver's side door to calm the 1-year-old, his .357 Magnum fell out of his shoulder holster. Oh well, why not carry, as they say in the old, the Dirty Harry movies, the most powerful handgun? Was it Dirty Harry? The most powerful handgun in the world in a shoulder holster so that when you lean over to calm your crying infant, it falls out. By the way, a drop and discharge, though that does happen from time to time, and gun enthusiasts insist that it cannot, as common, and perhaps if not as common, then even more common, is this story. If you think it's an unusual one, I got a million of them for you. The gun didn't fall, hit the ground, and discharge, but rather the gun fell out, and he was aware of it falling out, and he reached to catch it. And his finger, in doing so, accidentally caught on and pulled the trigger, firing a deadly shot into his own stomach, according to the Associated Press. This McClatchy story. How do you like this one? You're reading the Miami Herald's run of a McClatchy story citing the Associated Press. So like third hand here. The incident happened Tuesday at 2:15 p.m. in the driveway of a home in eastern Pennsylvania, and it was all caught on surveillance video nearby. Berwick, Pennsylvania police told the AP. Morris was rushed to the hospital shortly after he was shot. He underwent surgery at the hospital but died from his wounds 3 hours later. A young father of a 1-year-old infant no longer around to help raise the child. And I don't really know why he was carrying a .357 Magnum in a shoulder holster, but doubtless he would tell you, to protect my family. And once again, the item we bought for protection of the family has ended up killing the family instead, and all by accident. Who knew? But just a reminder, whether or not you are Paul Waldman and in favor of banning almost all guns, or Armando and in favor of banning, I guess, all guns, or me and you don't know what the hell to do, you just like to collect the stories and want to know, how do they inform you when it comes to making decisions about what to do about guns, you're stuck with this conclusion. Strapping a handheld instant death machine to your body routinely in the name of protection, freedom, hatred for government thugs, whatever it is, if you do that, that must necessarily change the mechanics of how you approach routine daily functions. And I mean all functions, bodily functions themselves. How many times do I tell you about stories about people who forget their guns in the bathroom, who drop their guns in the bathroom, who shoot themselves accidentally in the bathroom because they don't know what to do with this thing that they have strapped to their bodies. And, it's a brand new thing, and a new appendage, essentially. And they don't know what to do with it when they're taking care of business in the bathroom or leaning over to calm a crying baby. A natural instinct, exactly what you want dad to do, but he forgets, I strapped a handgun to my body, and if I lean over, there's nothing holding it in. By the way, great shoulder holster. Good choice there. In order to, I don't know exactly what drove the decision, but a lot of people sometimes, there are holsters of all kinds with an additional strap that snaps and holds the gun in if you do something like, lean over or shift your balance in some fashion. But people just don't take account for the possibility that they might position their body in some way other than straight up when they choose these holsters. Out comes the gun, bang, he's dead. Bad decision making, folks. That's all I can tell you. If you're gonna strap something on that can kill people in an instant, you got to be aware of it at all times, and that's a huge responsibility. But you know how it is. With great power comes great responsibility. And what power could be greater than granting individuals, supposedly, apparently, according to the courts, the right to carry a device with them at all times that gives them, on an individual basis and an instantaneous basis, the ability to deprive another person or anything else, any other living organism, of its life. Whether because you were afraid for your own life, or mistook it for a burglar, or just felt like it, that's kind of an extraordinary thing. And, that's one of the problems people have with the current interpretation of the Second Amendment. Another way of reading the Second Amendment now, I guess, legitimately in the eyes of the court is, you might need to have the ability to decide to end the lives on a whim of 50 plus concert goers in beneath the window of your hotel room. Maybe they're noisy and rowdy. Maybe somehow you thought they were forming into a mob that was going to come and burn you out of house and home like Frankenstein, or rather Frankenstein's monster, or whatever. Or maybe you just felt like it. That's the point. That's the big problem is good guys with guns, if they decide to become bad guys with guns, they don't have to file any paperwork at all for that. They can just go ahead and decide to do that. And we need to decide whether or not it's worth the price of freedom. Is the price of freedom really that everyone needs to have the right to arm themselves with something that will rob us of our freedom and everything we've got on a moment's notice, maybe no notice whatsoever, when that person decides it? I think that's a poor use of our resources. Anyway, one other thing I guess we should throw in there, just before we hop off of the gun subject, at least for the moment, and move into other topics. Think Progress, Addie Baird has this piece. Bump stock manufacturer appears to have misled ATF about the device's intended purpose. Just a little bit more about the bump stocks, and I'll make a point or two along the way. In the aftermath of a shooting targeting concert goers, you know all about it, Las Vegas, the NRA and conservative media have been pointing the finger at the Obama administration, and it's not untrue, and the Obama-era Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms for approving a device that allowed Sunday's attack to be as deadly as it was. But the company that manufactures the device appears to have previously lied about what it does to get that approval. Basic backstory to all this. When the bump stocks were first put on the market, there was some question, and the ATF, I guess, had the right to speak up and do something about banning them in the first instance. But what you saw was the Obama administration, and this was it was a clever ploy what the gun enthusiasts were doing. They had spent so much time on the Obama's coming for your guns. Obama's going to repeal the Second Amendment. Obama's going to take your guns away from you. Obama is anti-gun. He wants to take over. He wants the UN to rule the United States. Whatever the garbage was. He's a Muslim terrorist, and he wants to disarm you so that the Iranians can invade. But he was, because he's like a normal person, he was hypersensitive to this criticism. And what ended up happening, I think, was, in addition to being misled by the manufacturers of the bump stocks, he was sensitive to the charge that he was going to immediately come into office and do something to, quote unquote, take away gun rights, even though it's fairly hard to argue that there was any right at stake in this decision. But basically, they jumped out of the way of the problem and said, see, yeah, it's true. The Obama administration isn't, the reality is they're not going to be so anti-gun about everything. We'll let you have your little toy. We don't care. We're sensible people. We're going to have sensible regulation, perhaps, but we're not going to do this terrible, awful thing that you think is tyranny. So love us, please. And you know what? It didn't work. But anyway, he jumped out of the way of this one. And now that they've been used to murder large numbers of people, which is what they're for, the NRA says it's actually Obama's fault in all of this. It's an interesting little trick. Anyway, Think Progress, though, finds another wrinkle in this and says that the manufacturers lied to the ATF about what they were producing here. The Las Vegas gunman, you know his name, but I don't care, was able to kill and injure as many people as he did because of a gun modification, sort of, called a bump stock, a device that can be put on semi-automatic weapons to increase their rate of fire. A typical semi-automatic weapon can fire a whole lot. I don't want to bore enemy of the people here, but between 45 and 60 rounds a minute. But a fully automatic weapon can go to 600 to 800 rounds in the same amount of time. Blah, blah, blah. We know that fully automatic weapons have been illegal in the U.S. since 1986, but bump stocks can essentially make it so a semi-automatic weapon can meet the firing rate of a fully automatic gun. Officials say a dozen of those things were found in this guy's hotel rooms when they found him dead upstairs. Following the attack, Slide Fire, a company that manufactures bump stocks, posted on its website the approval letter it received from ATF in 2010, allowing it to sell the devices. Since the letter was posted, several conservative outlets and eventually the NRA have pushed the fact that the device was approved during the Obama years. And they're all correct, but SlideFire appears to have misled the agency about the intended purpose of producing bump stocks, although I fail to see how that's possible. But we'll see what they had to say for themselves. In the approval letter, ATF writes, "Your letter advises us that the stock is intended to assist persons whose hands have limited mobility to bump fire an AR-15 rifle." That's not misleading them about the purpose. It's telling them what all right. So but they made it out like, in other words, the plan originally was, well, we'll make it so that it's about helping people with disabilities enjoy their firearms hobby. Which, I mean, I guess we're sensitive to the needs of the disabled here, and our weird approach to progressive inclusion might make us pause and think about that. But then you say, I would like to exclude as many people as possible. If I could exclude able-bodied people from doing this, I would. So maybe it's not discriminatory after all. Anyway, here's what the ATF letter says, I guess. This is in reference to your submission and accompanying letter to the Firearms Technology Branch, or FTB, of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, ATF, asking for an evaluation of a replacement shoulder stock for an AR-15 type rifle. Your letter advises that the stock, referenced in this reply as a bump stock, is intended to assist persons whose hands have limited mobility to bump fire an AR-15 type rifle. We don't want them to be able to do that, though. Okay. Your submission includes the following: a block to replace the pistol grip while providing retention for the selector stop spring. Sorry, enemy of the people. A hollow shoulder stock is intended to be installed over the rear of an AR-15 fitting with a sliding stock type buffer tube assembly and a set of assembly instructions. Blah, blah, blah. That means you get to shoot it like a machine gun. David Chipman, a former ATF agent, spoke with Think Progress Wednesday about the approval of bump stocks, which he said the ATF approved because they're a piece of S, but also noted that the inference in SlideFire's application was that the device would be used to help disabled veterans. Well, you can't get in their way, right? I don't know. What is that supposed to mean? The ATF approved because they're a piece of S, like the ATF is a piece of S, or the bump stocks are a piece of S. Why would you approve them if, I don't know. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Anyway, this has nothing to do with wounded vets, Chipman said. It's a total scam. But conservative outlets and now the NRA have run with the talking point anyway. On Wednesday morning, conservative outlet CNS ran a story that read, about a year and a half into the Barack Obama administration, the ATF issued an opinion letter giving the go-ahead to an aftermarket accessory that allows users to bump fire a semi-automatic rifle. The accessory doesn't allow you to bump fire it. It just makes it easier on your hands. That's all. The NRA's spokeswoman Dana Loesch shared the story on Twitter. Breitbart ran a nearly identical story on Wednesday, writing, while bump stocks are taking criticism from Dems and Republicans alike, it's interesting to note that the devices were approved for sale in 2010 by Barack Obama's ATF. Fox News mentioned that bump stocks have been approved during the Obama years, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see. The NRA leaned on the argument in a statement calling for ATF review of the devices. Now here, I think this gives us the opportunity to make a slightly more important point about the deal that is supposedly, it's not to the stage where it's on the table, but under consideration. You may have seen the news yesterday that the NRA appeared to be okay with the idea, possibly, of a bump stock ban. But what was left out of the headlines anyway was that they had some conditions for that. And one of the conditions was that it would be okay, in other words, to ban bump stocks as part of a overall, as part of a wider piece of legislation addressing gun issues, which would include national reciprocity for gun permitting and open carry and concealed carry users. In other words, they wanted people, if you're licensed to carry in any state, you should be considered licensed to carry in every state. This is a dream come true for gun owners who otherwise spend all their time insisting on states' rights. But this time, a federal interference in states' rights and forcing the gun permits of a, let's say, perhaps lax state, a state lax in its gun safety regulation and in the requirements for permitting, to force its standards for permitting on other states that might take more care, because states' rights is a joke. Anyway, the NRA's statement was basically, okay, fine, maybe banning of bump stocks is something we would consider, but, we would only consider it, they very slyly say, as part of an overall addressing of gun rights that would include loosening gun laws along the way. I think we should take note of that. Plus, of course, I think we should take note of the fact that I think they desperately want, as we detailed perhaps too much in yesterday's show, to take a flyer on this one, because if you really stop and examine what bump firing is, you find out that almost every gun on the market poses this same danger, and they would prefer that you not know that. I would prefer that you do know that. Do what you want with it. Moving on. And I think moving on from the gun issue for the time being, unless there are any more brilliant comments from listeners that need to be incorporated into the show, and I think there are. Yes, Justice reminding me of this one, and I think Cheryl shared this one yesterday as well. Just an interesting statistic to toss in there. Apparently just 3% of adults own half of America's guns. Justice making that same point. I'm not for gun control, but gun safety, and I think we'd be a lot more safe if there were less guns in the hands of the 3% who do have them. That's true. And stockpiling those weapons is a unique and weird indicator, I think, and might be worth keeping an eye on. But just to put the statistic is rather jarring. 3% of adults own half of America's guns. That's Chris Ingram's piece from back in September of 2016. And I don't even know whether that, here's a good question. Is the 3%ers militia group, is that referring to that? I don't think that they actually intentionally referred to that. It means something completely different and mythical and stupid in their eyes. But at any rate, it's I guess a great irony of the gun debate that it ends up being the number 3%. These guys trip over their numbers and statistics all the time and do unintended things with them. Anyway, point well taken, something worth remembering. Now, in pocket, many other stories that deserve our attention, and many other directions in which the day could go. To catch up a little bit on the Facebook and fake news and election manipulation story, I've got a couple of data points to add to things. Let's see. First, and perhaps the most important of them, let's see if I can get the Wall Street Journal to allow me to see the story. The Wall Street Journal has a really interesting firewall, and I think brilliantly designed, but a great source of frustration for me. But luckily I've prepared on this front. But their firewall will allow you to share a Wall Street Journal article on Twitter. And if you click on their link, you can read the entire story. But if you put the story away to read later, you've missed your chance. They give you one shot unless you can probably go in and delete all your cookies and get another shot. But without doing anything like that, without going out of your way, you get one shot at reading their article and one shot only. So if I read the article and say, yeah, this is good, and put it in Pocket to read to you tomorrow, then, you're going to end up not having the opportunity to hear the story because you'll have missed your one chance. So what I had to do with this story, there was another story that I did miss my chance on, and we won't get a chance to share it in full, though we can share the headline. But this one, I went ahead and emailed to myself. I just actually literally grabbed the article and cut and pasted it and put it in an email so I could read you. Facebook cut Russia out of April report on election influence. That seems weird. The drafting of the report sparked internal debate over how much information to disclose about Russian influence campaigns on the social network. Robert McMillan and Shane Harris wrote this piece yesterday. Facebook cut references to Russia from a public report issued in April about and this was early on when they were looking to cooperate a little bit more after dismissing the whole idea as crazy at first. They cut Russia from a public report in April about manipulation of its platform around the presidential election because of concerns among the company's lawyers and members of its policy team, according to people familiar with the matter. The drafting of the report sparked internal debate over how much information to disclose about Russian mischief on Facebook and its efforts to affect U.S. public opinion during the presidential contest. According to these people, it tells us very helpfully that they mean the 2016 presidential contest. I skipped that, but now I've wasted just as much time or more. It's one of the ironies of doing the show. Okay, moving on. Some at Facebook pushed not to include a mention of Russia in the report because the company's understanding of Russian activity was too speculative, according to one of these people. Ultimately, it's all speculative. They don't know what's going on at their own company. That brings us to an entirely different point. But okay. Ultimately, the 13-page report published on 27th of April and titled Information Operations in Facebook was shortened by several pages by Facebook's legal and policy teams from an earlier draft, a little like the 9/11 report in Saudi Arabia, right? And didn't mention Russia at all, the people said. Rather, it concluded that malicious actors engaged in influence campaigns during the U.S. presidential election, but said it couldn't determine who was responsible. The extent of Facebook's understanding at the time of Russian influence is unclear. We don't know who did it, but they were paying us in rubles. Okay. It wasn't until a September 6th Facebook newsroom blog post that the company publicly identified Russia as a source of such efforts. The debated inclusion of Russia in the April report raises new questions about when Facebook became aware of Russian manipulation of its platform during the election. In the blog post last month, Facebook disclosed that Russian entities spent $150,000 to run 5,200 potentially divisive ads on its platform after declaring during the summer that it had found no such activity. Just a bunch of rubles. No activity, just a pile of rubles for no reason. The information on those advertisements was uncovered after the April report, a Facebook spokesman, claimed anyway. At the time that we published the white paper, we were not in a position to know for sure who was behind the activity that we described, and we did not feel comfortable making a definitive attribution. I could see that, but still. Again, where are these rubles coming from? Facebook's post last month said the Russia-backed ads it investigated ran through May, a month after the foreign influence report appeared. On Monday, the company said an estimated 10 million people saw the Russian ads. But regular posts, not paid ads, from the accounts had a much wider reach because of shares, likes, and comments, according to outside researchers. 6 of the Russian pages discovered by Facebook generated approximately 20 million shares, likes, and comments, according to data published Thursday by Jonathan Albright, a research director with Columbia University's Tow Center for Digital Journalism. Facebook, under fire for playing down the role of influence campaigns during last year's election, in recent weeks provided information about the Russia-backed accounts to congressional investigators. Those investigations, which probe U.S. intelligence agencies' findings of alleged Russian interference in the U.S. democratic process, have also ensnared Twitter and Alphabet, that's Google's parent company. Facebook said it plans to participate in public hearings on November 1st held by House and Senate Intel committees. Google and Twitter have said they'll take part in the Senate hearing but they declined to comment about the House hearing. Some lawmakers have already expressed frustration at the extent and speed of Facebook's investigation into Russian meddling. I'm sure it has been rather slow, and I don't know exactly what to say about it, except that I could see that they might be rather loosey-goosey, let's say, in this thing, as they have been in all things, because, like I said, it started as a cool app to share pictures of hot co-eds. They never really thought that it was going to rise to this level. The fact that it did was great, and they were all fantastically interested in grabbing up as much of the money as possible. But just kind of thought, people are sharing pictures of their families, man. We're not doing anything wrong here, and we're getting rich doing it, so what's the big deal? And I think they were probably ill-prepared from day one to deal with a situation like this. And frankly, it would probably be pretty hard to guess that they were ever going to be called upon to do that. And I can understand how you could get caught flat-footed. On the other hand, once we hand you billions and billions of dollars for your valuation, well, the fact that you're amassing billions and billions in valuation should be a pretty big red flag for you, and it should basically alert you right at that point. Yeah, you're going to need to lawyer up and get some people who will be able to red team everything you've got, disassemble, reassemble, and re-engineer everything you've done to make sure you know about all of the vulnerabilities. This one would have been hard to guess, but manipulation wouldn't have been hard to anticipate. After all, your whole thing is algorithm-based, and what is an algorithm but an attempt to manipulate the data you've got? Someone else is going to try it too. We'll be back in just a minute. Hi there, everybody. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. This time we'll have to manually fade out our music. I wonder if I can make a 1-minute cut of this. I probably could, but I'm too lazy, or rather I should say too excited about combing the internet for great stories to bring you on this and every other episode of the Kagro in the Morning Show. That's the excuse. It's far better than saying that I'm too lazy to do it. What's next on our Facebook roundup? Well, let's see. One brief stop for this story, and I think this one can be kept relatively brief. Who's got this one? CNN has got this one. This is just sort of interesting. We've talked about all the various things that Russians did with Facebook. Dark posts. Oh, I'm going to have some auto-playing video. I forgot. CNN, one of their favorite pastimes. Let's see if I can get this muted. Then it wouldn't be a problem. Okay. Great. There we go. So, dark posts, etc., things like that, online organizing of real world events in the United States from Russia. We've discussed some of that. This one, a little less, obviously dangerous, but of course, sucking money out of America and pumping it into Russian manipulation and hacking efforts, but just sort of interesting how widely they cast their net, and maybe as part of the effort to look like genuine American political movements, they decided to adopt one of the favorite tactics of sometimes genuine American political movements. What else did they use online that American political activists do? Exclusive, says CNN's Donnie O'Sullivan, unless it's Donnie O'Sullivan. It's just one N. I don't know. You tell me, Donnie. Exclusive, Russian-linked group sold merchandise online. Hey, I'd like to sell merchandise online. And yes, there's been a lot of people who made some great efforts to try and do that. And of course, everything got screwed up because everything in the world is complicated. Everybody performed fantastically on their end, and I was unable because of internal complications to just finally get around to pulling the trigger on selling our own merchandise. More about that some other day, I guess, as I try and iron this out. Anyway, here's what the Russians were able to do, because they don't care about anything. I wish if I were as free as the Russians to do whatever the hell I wanted, I guess, well, maybe I'd be rich. I don't know. Young, gifted, and black. What? Yes, that's right. Melanin and muscles. Okay, our sons matter. That makes sense to me. The slogans on clothing that a group called Blacktivist offered for sale through Facebook, that makes more sense, were supposed to look like they came from American Black Lives Matter activists. And indeed, They look like they might. But in fact, they were being promoted by a Russian-linked group working to amplify political discord in the U.S. before the presidential election. And they thought they'd grift a little money off of it on the side, too. Why not, right? CNN first reported last week that Blacktivist accounts on Facebook and Twitter had regularly shared content intended to stoke outrage in an apparent attempt to amplify racial tensions during the U.S. presidential election. Pause for a second. I don't know what Blacktivist did or didn't say on social media, but there's a great deal of room for interpretation in anything. It worries me when CNN says things like stoke outrage and amplify racial tensions, when it could have been certainly stuff that was over the top and calculated to provoke more division rather than convince both black activists and activists of other persuasions that something real was happening here that deserved legitimate attention. And I could certainly see approaching things that way and still being characterized by CNN as attempting to stoke racial tensions. I don't really know exactly what it is, but that's not the purpose of this story. So I guess for the moment we can set that aside. It was just more interesting to find out that the page maintained by these Blacktivist accounts on Facebook and Twitter sold T-shirts with those slogans on them. They appear to have sold fewer than 100 items from these this selection of Blacktivist branded merchandise, but the actual amount of clothing sold is less significant than what the effort represented. A move by the people behind Blacktivist, who are again Russian-linked folks, not genuine American activists of color. A move by the people behind Blacktivist to go beyond social media and spread their influence into the physical world. The Blacktivist Facebook page also promoted at least 7 rallies and demonstrations around the U.S. in 2016. So the dark underside of this, in addition to trying to siphon off cash, one, from Americans and for them to keep it, despite the fact that they were doing, or they had hoped to do harm to the American political system. But it also, of course, took money off of people who genuinely were interested, perhaps, and probably could have spent their money better had they known. And in addition to all this, it gives fuel to the idiotic conspiracy theories, which turn out not to be all that idiotic, necessarily for this reason. I mean, they're idiotic for lots of other reasons, but on this score, the idiotic conspiracy theorists who would say things like Black Lives Matter isn't a genuine American political movement aimed at finding the solution to anything. It's just either black radicals who just want to stir up trouble, and you know how they always, it's awful echoes of the past. Outside agitators, or people who just want to make trouble rather than seek a solution, or even worse, conspiracy theories like that's not even an American operation. Those people are communist agents, or Russians are manipulating them. And you remember right at the beginning of this whole Trump-Russia story, you know how I remember how reluctant I was to even deal with some of this stuff seriously. I'm worse than Facebook, I guess, on that count, right? The idea of everything being Russian manipulation. It made me pause. It made me say, this does make us sound like old-timey John Bircher conspiracy theorists. And yet this was going on. And what's interesting will be the point that when we get to the point at which these right-wing, and I'm sure we're there already, we just haven't noticed because they're just, small-time folks, but they're, I'm sure, out there claiming credit for having gotten it, quote unquote, gotten it right. And then the question will become, because of the way these networks work, was it extraordinarily perceptive of them and they picked up on something we all missed? Was it pure conjecture on their point that just coincidentally turned out to be right once in a million years? Or were they in on it? Were they tipped off by other operatives that they could make this call and would eventually be vindicated? And as a special bonus, first you'll be mocked as fringe idiot conspiracy theorists, and people will point out, oh, they say Russians are behind all of this nonsense. But look at all the other dumb stuff on their website, and all the other, well, essentially probably white supremacist, racist stuff that fills up their websites. And everyone will say, so obviously they're crazy. Obviously they're wrong about this. Obviously you need to disregard it. But imagine their surprise when a few months later, we help you actually spill the beans and really do connect it to Russia. And then everybody says, oh my God, they turned out to be right. And some percentage of the population will be dumb enough to say, oh my God, they turned out to be right. I wonder what else they're right about. Maybe they're right about the white supremacy. Maybe they're right about the racism too. Maybe I should have listened. That would be a brilliant plan. I don't know if anybody was competent enough to pull that off, but it's out there. And now we're the conspiracy theorists. Dang it. I wish I had anticipated this. Okay. What else have we got from this story? I mean, I think you got the gist of it, and I think we can leave it at this point. There's plenty more detail about what they sold, and you can take a look at the designs, and nothing about the designs would have by themselves raised an eyebrow, I don't think. But just sort of interesting in that they were out there in that space in the online world, too. That would only make them look more legitimate, oddly enough. One of the other stories I wanted to get to about Facebook, I'm going to have to scroll down a little bit to see if I can find it, but there was at some point, there's one other data point from which I think I'll limit myself basically to the headline and lead. This was another CNN article from a couple of days ago. You will by this point have heard this one too, but I thought we ought to at least include it. Exclusive. Russian-linked Facebook ads targeted Michigan and Wisconsin. Manu Raju, Dylan Byers, Dana Bash on that one. Some big names on that CNN story. Just confirmation that, in fact, those Russian Facebook ads somehow, just coincidentally, happened to reinforce the internal political strategy that it is claimed the brilliant geniuses of the Trump campaign were adopting for the final months of the push. And gee whiz, if the states that hadn't flipped in some time just suddenly all of a sudden did flip, although it's been years in the making, in particular in Wisconsin, where the Republicans have been pushing voter restrictions so onerous that eventually that alone might have been able to tip the balance. But just wanted to put out there that there's a data point on the record that CNN has established for us that they did in fact target the same swing states that the official Trump campaign just happened to be targeting too, and they hadn't yet publicly, I don't think, shared that information. They just happened upon the same states because they're such brilliant political operatives over there in Russia. Maybe not. Anyway, I was moving down to another story, and I guess one more I'll put on the record as I'm scrolling down to the story I'm looking for about Zuckerberg. Washington Post's story of last week. Russians took a page from corporate America by using Facebook tool to ID and influence voters. I felt like that was another interesting data point, but maybe one that didn't add anything new to it. I thought the whole point of the Russia-Facebook angle was that, yeah, they are using Facebook tools that are made available ideally to businesses, which I don't know. I guess we're supposed to think it's somehow better for businesses in America to be able to psychologically profile you and manipulate you into buying garbage than it is for Russians to be able to psychologically profile you and manipulate you into voting for garbage. But it's out there. And again, it's always good to put it on the record so that we have links when we put together our report, from which we will not be eliminating Russia later on. I'm not making a formal report, but I'm empowering you to if you want to. Now, I'm going to continue scrolling. The point I really wanted to get to was I'm looking for the story that basically asks, does Mark Zuckerberg even have any idea what Facebook really is at this point? We did read the story from BuzzFeed. Mark Zuckerberg can't stop you from reading this because the algorithms have already won. A related story I'm positive of it somewhere down here nearby. It's only just a little bit older than that one, and I forgot to include it on the day we read that one, and we ran out of time. Still looking around for it. It should have been. I know I need a better way of organizing what's in here, and I think Pocket actually has better ways of organizing it, and they're too complicated for me to figure out because I'm always adding more and more stuff, and the time I would spend tagging things would very quickly outpace the time I spend doing these shows. Maybe what I ought to do, I think Zuckerberg's name was in the title, so let me just put that in there and see if I can search that way. But there was basically an article questioning, does Zuckerberg even have a handle on what his creation is and does? And that's an actual serious open question. There it is. New York Magazine, Max Reed, which R-E-A-D. He's a writer, and his name is Max Reed. And I question again whether or not we're in a computer simulation, or if everyone's using fake names here. Does even Mark Zuckerberg know? It says what Facebook is. The same company that gives you birthday reminders also helped ensure the integrity of the German elections. That's an interesting entry point into this question. Mark Zuckerberg had just returned from paternity leave, and he wanted to talk about Facebook, democracy, and elections, and to define what he felt his creation owed the world in exchange for its hegemony. A few weeks earlier, in early September, the company's chief security officer had admitted that Facebook had sold $100,000 worth of ads on its platform to Russian government-linked trolls who intended to influence the American political process. Now, in a statement broadcast live on Facebook on September 21st and subsequently posted to his profile page, Zuckerberg pledged to increase the resources of Facebook's security and election integrity teams and work proactively to strengthen the democratic process. Who knew he was ever going to have to do this, right? Back when it was a co-ed thing. To effect this, he outlined specific steps to, quote, make political advertising more transparent, unquote. Something they fought for a long time, of course. Facebook will soon require that all political ads disclose which page paid for them. I'm epic fail memes, and I approve this message, our writer includes. And ensure that every ad a given advertiser runs is accessible to anyone, essentially ending the practice of dark advertising. Good, thank you. Promoted posts that are only ever seen by the specific groups at which they're targeted. Zuckerberg, in his statement, compared this development favorably to old media, like radio and television, which already require political ads to reveal their funders. We're going to bring Facebook to an even higher standard of transparency, he writes. Again, they did fight that requirement for years. This pledge was, in some ways, a reverse of another announcement that the company made earlier the same day, unveiling a new set of tools businesses can use to target Facebook members who have visited their stores. Now, the experience of briefly visiting Zappos.com and finding yourself haunted for weeks by shoe ads could have an offline equivalent, produced by a visit to your local shoe store. Hope you like shoe ads. Where Facebook's new offline outcomes tool promised to entrap more of the analog world in Facebook's broad surveillance net, Zuckerberg's promise of transparency assured anxious readers that the company would submit itself to the established structures of offline politics. It was an admirable commitment, but reading through it, I kept getting stuck on one line. We have been working to ensure the integrity of the German elections this weekend, Zuckerberg writes. It's a comforting sentence, a statement that shows Zuckerberg and Facebook are eager to restore trust in their system. But it's not the kind of language we expect from media organizations, even the largest ones. It's the language of governments or political parties or NGOs. A private company working unilaterally to ensure election integrity in a country that it's not even based in. The only two I could think of that night, the only two I could think of that might feel obligated to make the same assurances are Diebold, the widely hated former manufacturer of electronic voting systems, and Academy, the private military contractor whose founder keeps begging for a chance to run Afghanistan. This is not good company. What is Facebook? We can talk about its scale. Population-wise, it's larger than any single country. In fact, it's bigger than any continent besides Asia. At 2 billion members, or monthly active Facebook users, is the largest at 2 billion members, monthly active Facebook users is the largest non-biologically sorted group of people on the planet after Christians, and growing consistently at around 17% year after year. It could surpass that group, Christians, before the end of 2017 and encompass 1/3 of the world's population by this time next year. Outside China, where Facebook has been banned since 2009, thinking about that one. 1 in every 5 minutes on the internet is spent on Facebook. In countries with only recently high rates of internet connectivity, like Myanmar and Kenya, Facebook is, for all intents and purposes, the whole internet. But, like the internet, Facebook's vertigo-inducing scale, encompassing not just the sheer size of its user base, but the scope of its penetration of human activity, from birthday reminders, mundane, to the liberal democracy significant, defies comprehension. When I scroll through the newsfeed on my phone, it's almost impossible to hold in my mind that the site on which I am currently considering joining a group called Flat Earth No Trolls is the same one whose executives are likely to testify in front of Congress about their company's role in a presidential election. Or that the site I use to invite people to parties is also at the center of an international controversy over documentation of the ethnic cleansing of Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. I'm sure I mispronounced that as well. Facebook has grown so big and become so totalizing, interesting word, that we can't really grasp it all at once. Like a 4-dimensional object, we catch slices of it when it passes through the 3-dimensional world we recognize. Oh, my head. In one context, it looks and acts like a television broadcaster. But in this other context, an NGO. In a recent essay for the London Review of Books, John Lancaster argued that for all its rhetoric about connecting the world, the company is ultimately built to extract data from users to sell to advertisers. This may be true, but Facebook's business model tells us only so much about how the network shapes the world. Over the past year, I've heard Facebook compared to a dozen entities and felt like I've caught glimpses of it acting like a dozen more. I've heard government metaphors, a state, the EU, the Catholic Church, Star Trek's United Federation of Planets, whatever. And business ones, a railroad company, a mall. Physical metaphors, a town square, an interstate highway, an electrical grid. And economic ones, a special economic zone, Gosplan. Gosplan. I don't even know what that is. Oh my goodness. For every direct comparison, there was an equally elaborate one, a faceless elder god, a conquering alien fleet. There are real consequences to our inability to understand what Facebook is. Not even President Pope Viceroy Zuckerberg, that's not a bad name for him, Zuckerberg himself seemed prepared for the role Facebook has played in global politics this past year. In which case, how can we be assured that Facebook is really safeguarding democracy for us, and that it's not us who need to be safeguarding democracy against Facebook? That's also a big question too. Right. Thanks for bringing it up. Nowhere was this confusion about Facebook's and Zuckerberg's role more in public life more in evidence than in the rumors that the CEO was planning to run for president. Yes, good point. Every year, Zuckerberg takes on a personal challenge, a sort of billionaire-scale New Year's resolution, about which he posts updates to his Facebook page. For most Facebook users, these meticulously constructed and assiduously managed challenges are the only access they'll ever have to Zuckerberg's otherwise highly private personal life. Thousands of people cluster in the comments under his status updates like crowds loitering outside Buckingham Palace, praising the CEO, encouraging him in his progress, and drawing portraits of his likeness. This year, Zuckerberg's challenge has been to meet people in all the states of the U.S. that he hadn't yet visited. His first stop in January was Texas. How do you not get to Texas as a billionaire? Anyway, since then, he's been to 24 other states. Zuckerberg has adamantly denied that the trips are a trial run for the campaign trail, and having spoken with many of the people he's met with over the course of his journeys, not to mention stern Facebook publicists, I tend to believe him. I mean, I want to visit every state, too. I mean, I guess that's the thing. Of course, I'm not a billionaire. It's interesting just how introverted you can be as the head of a company that does this much all over the world and not have gone anywhere. You know what I'm saying? All right. Well, anyway, that's computer dudes for you. He wants to break out of that. I admire that. I agree with that anyway. He limits his tour activity to interactions in private groups or unannounced visits. No speeches, no barnstorms, no baby kissing. He's issued no policy prescriptions and inserted himself into political debates rarely and in limited ways. And yet the road trips sure look like a campaign, or at least the sort of listening tour that politicians sometimes stage to convince voters even before announcing that their hearts are in the right place. To some extent, of course, the media curiosity is his own fault. After all, he did choose to be professionally photographed while eating fried food and staring intently at machinery. But it's hard for me not to think that the incessant speculation is a function of our own incomplete view of Facebook. The Zuckerberg for President interpretation of his project understands Facebook as a large, well-known company from which a top executive might reasonably launch a political career within the recognizable political framework of the U.S. electoral process. But if Facebook is bigger, newer, and weirder than a mere company, surely his trip is bigger, newer, and weirder than a mere presidential run. Maybe he's doing research and development, reverse engineering social bonds to understand how Facebook might better facilitate them. I don't know if he's extroverted enough to do that, but okay. Maybe Facebook is a church and Zuckerberg is offering his benedictions. Maybe Facebook is a state within a state and Zuckerberg is inspecting its boundaries. Maybe Facebook is an emerging political community and Zuckerberg is cultivating his constituents. Maybe Facebook is a surveillance state and Zuckerberg is a dictator undertaking a propaganda tour. Maybe Facebook is a dual power, a network overlaid across the U.S., parallel to and in competition with the government to fulfill civic functions, and Zuckerberg is securing his command. Maybe Facebook is border control between the analog and the digital, and Zuckerberg is inspecting one side for holes. Maybe Facebook is a fleet of alien spaceships that have colonized the globe, and Zuckerberg is the viceroy trying to win over his new subjects. Or maybe it's as simple as this. If you run a business and you want to improve it, you need to spend time talking to your customers. If you've created a hybrid state, church, railroad, mall, alien colony, and you want to understand or expand it, you need to spend time with your hybrid citizen, believer, passenger, customer subjects. Okay. Pretty amazing. Goodness. Well, that's a lot to contemplate. There's still more, of course. Zuckerberg's trip was the most covered component of what seemed to be a broad self-examination on the part of the company that began soon after the election, as columns and articles about the scourge of fake news castigated the site for its inaction in the face of this tide of misinformation. Zuckerberg himself was initially resistant to an interpretation of 2016 that placed undue, or really much of any, blame on Facebook. Personally, I think that the idea that fake news on Facebook, which is a very small amount of the content, influenced the election in any way, Zuckerberg told the crowd at a conference 2 days after the election. It's a pretty crazy idea. I can't blame him too much for that, right? I was almost there myself. In a status update a few days later, he explained why Facebook wouldn't undertake drastic efforts to address misinformation on its platform. This is an area where I believe we must proceed very carefully, though. Identifying the truth is complicated. He's right about that. Facebook has traditionally and sometimes controversially declined to litigate the truth of claims posted in its platform. It's preferred to see itself as a liberal institution in the classical sense, one that allowed free debate and discussion, provided that no one posted a photo that included a nipple. Of course, that would have been the breaking point. We'll have to take a short break from bringing up fun words like nipple in just a minute here, bring in our music to remind ourselves that that has to happen. and read just a little bit more as we head into our break. This pose of thoughtful deliberation and liberality did not satisfy complaints. Facebook was unquestionably important to the election. Between March 23rd, 2015, when Ted Cruz announced his candidacy, and November of 2016, well, we'll tell you what happened in that time space after this. Hi, and welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio. We've had a couple of interesting comments come in during our discussion of the Facebook phenomenon and the Trump-Russia investigation as well. Michael Musson saying, I wonder if any of the Russian money laundered by the Trump organization. And we do need to talk about that. We can't get to it today. That makes good Monday content. I wonder if any of that Russian money was used to buy ads. That would be a different kind of direct link. That's interesting. I don't know how likely it is, but yeah, I mean, I guess anything's possible in all this. I've never really thought about that one. It's a good thought. I don't know if it leads us anywhere, but why rule anything out at this point? Warlock has chimed in again. I'm not certain what to make of this comment. Maybe you want to add to it. Unlikely, he says, that Senate races would be affected by Twitter. I don't know. I mean, certainly not in the same way that a presidential race would, but I guess it's not, it's certainly not something that Senate campaign staffs agree with. I mean, they spend an awful lot of time on social media in the hopes that it will affect the outcome of the race. But, traditionally speaking, no, and doesn't often do things like that, does it? Well, I don't know. This was sort of a unique thing, but maybe you want to develop that thought a little more or add something to it and see if we can share it. Michael also adds here, debate whether Russian influence was successful, obscuring that just the attempt was damning enough. And that's true. All that you need to do to cause trouble is attempt it. You're really stepping well outside your bounds at that point. But then again, this is a power with whom we're essentially at cold war and still are. We thought it was over. Apparently it's not. Well worth reminding ourselves. All right, well, let's continue on with this one. I left off rather awkwardly there at the end, and there's so much more we want to get to, including Paula's piece, which let's see if we can't wrap up this. This is a very long article, and I don't know that we'll get through all of it, but we'll mine it for a couple of extra good nuggets. We were, when we left off before the last break, reading that this pose of thoughtful deliberation about what Facebook really is and what Zuckerberg might have been doing in his tour, and what hand they might have had in changing or influencing the outcome of the election. This pose of thoughtful deliberation and liberality did not satisfy complaints. Facebook was unquestionably important to the election, and it was between the point where Ted Cruz announced and the election. 128 million people in America created nearly 10 billion Facebook posts, shares, likes, and comments about the election. For scale, 137 million people voted last year. So 128 million people in America became engaged on the issues of the election and politics on Facebook. 128 million people on Facebook, 137, just 9 million more, actually cast ballots. Interesting. But what had been presented as a Democratic town hall was revealed to be a densely interwoven collection of parallel media ecosystems and political infrastructures outside the control of mainstream media outlets and major political parties, and moving like a wrecking ball through both. Opportunistic hucksters and unhinged true believers sold bizarre conspiracy theories, the former for the purpose of driving traffic to their advertising-festooned websites, and the latter out of some mixture of cynicism and zealotry. Hyper-partisan sites like TruthFeed and InfoWars now made up what Yochai Benkler of Harvard's Berkman Klein Center of Internet and Society called a right-wing social media attention backbone, through which conspiracy mongering and disinformation traveled up to the legitimating sources and with which extreme actors could set the parameters of political conversation, as Breitbart did with immigration. There was no easy way to moderate or counter this without abjuring democratic values. A recent study from Benkler and his colleagues on social media's role in the election puts it this way. Our observations suggest that fixing the American public sphere may be much harder than we would like. It wasn't just a panicking media establishment that wasn't buying Facebook's neutral stance, but increasingly Facebook employees themselves. In late November, BuzzFeed reported on the existence of a secret Facebook task force that had assembled, without managerial oversight, to deal with the problem of misinformation. That BuzzFeed was able to learn about the task force was as noteworthy as its existence. Dissent is rare at Facebook, and openly critical leaks like that are almost unheard of. It had become clear that the company could no longer fall back on the pieties of neutral platformism. Zuckerberg soon issued a new status update outlining steps Facebook would take to address the problem of misinformation, and a month later, the company released the first in a series of updates to its platform aimed at heading it off. Facebook is a new kind of platform. It's not a traditional technology company. It's not a traditional media company, he said in a video chat with Facebook's COO, Sheryl Sandberg. We feel responsible for how it's used. And then in January, he launched his personal challenge. In his announcement, he referred obliquely to a tumultuous 2016. It was the first time he seemed to indicate that he had been personally shaken by the election, and he offered his own analysis of the global political moment. For decades, technology and globalization have made us more productive and connected, he wrote. This has created many benefits, but for a lot of people it has also made life more challenging. This has contributed to a greater sense of division than I have felt in my lifetime. It was a remarkable thing for the CEO of Facebook to admit. Zuckerberg had spent years touting Facebook's ultimate goal as making the world more open and connected, as he wrote in a letter to investors in advance of the company's 2012 IPO. Now he was suggesting that the more open and connected the world that Facebook facilitated, that the more open, and connected world Facebook had facilitated had turned out to be a stranger and more perilous one. Well, there's nothing that dark posting has to do with openness and transparency, so problem right there, but small one. Well, I'll leave it up to you. In his January post, Zuckerberg was still disinclined to place specific blame on Facebook, but he could certainly see the wreckage both to the liberal political order and to his company's brand. His travel project would, if nothing else, put a human face on a worryingly large and powerful force that had entered Americans' lives. It would also provide Zuckerberg with data about how Facebook could best make use of its power. On January 16th, high school students from the talented and gifted Magnet School in Dallas were building a community garden as part of a Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration when Zuckerberg made his first stop. The man who'd changed the internet, and in turn the world, had come to Texas to help plant a garden. Well, technically he was in Dallas to testify in a lawsuit against Facebook's VR subsidiary, Oculus, but you don't become a billionaire by letting a good court appearance go to waste. We're all like, but why Mark Zuckerberg? It's MLK Day, one student later joked. But he stayed and pitched in for 3 hours. He took his gloves off and reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm Mark," as if I didn't know. He was extremely casual and humble, and I really respected that, another student said. He also went to the rodeo, his first, with Fort Worth Mayor Betsy Price, who gave him a cowboy hat, also his first, and met with Dallas police. In a status update he posted the evening of his departure, sounding charmingly like a colonial sociologist, he attempted in vain to characterize the social relations he had observed. In many ways, I still don't have a clear sense of Texas. This state is complex, and everyone has a lot of layers, as Americans, as Texans, as members of a local community, and even just as individuals. In the comments, users lined up to pitch Zuckerberg on visiting their home regions. If Zuckerberg left with a lack of clarity, he must also have left inspired, because a month later he published a long essay called Building Global Community on his Facebook page. Clocking in at nearly 6,000 words, the post was the fullest expression of Zuckerberg's understanding of the current political situation and the clearest articulation of what he imagined Facebook's purpose should now be. Like the Communist Manifesto, Building Global Community opens by offering a theory of history. In this case, the story of how we've learned to come together in ever greater numbers, from tribes to cities to nations. This ever-expanding scale of human interaction continues to evolve, and today, Zuckerberg tells us, we are close to taking our next step. Zuckerberg isn't gauche enough to say that Facebook is the next step that should follow the Westphalian order. Rather, he writes, progress demands that we form a global community. And wow, isn't it funny, there happens to be a global community right here in Facebook. Facebook had never before had a charter on the order of Zuckerberg's declaration, and in its wake, the company became more intentional in its support of communities. VP of Product Partnerships, Ime Archibong, I suppose is how you would pronounce that, told me, mere connection was no longer sufficient. The character of those connections now mattered as well. Coinciding with his manifesto, Facebook began courting the heads of its most highly engaged user groups in the same way it does advertisers and app developers, bringing them in for monthly meetings with top Facebook executives and diverting resources to empower them. In June, 5 months after publishing his manifesto, which maybe sensing it had overcommitted him, he now calls a blob, Zuckerberg announced that Facebook's mission would change. It would now officially be to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. Katie Losse, L-O-S-S-E, Losse, an early Facebook employee and Zuckerberg's former speechwriter, told me she thought it represented a serious transformation of the company's purpose. The early days were so neutral that it was almost weird, she said. The first statement of purpose she could remember was a thing Zuckerberg would say at product meetings. I just want to create information flow. Now he was speaking of collective values for what should and should not be allowed. It's very interesting that the community language is finally being brought in, Losse said. Community is like a church. It's a social structure with values. 2 days after publishing his manifesto, Zuckerberg and his wife, Priscilla Chan, showed up unannounced at a cocktail bar called the Haberdasher in Mobile, Alabama. The bar's owner offered to run interference with the Saturday night pre-Mardi Gras crowd, but Zuckerberg waved her off. We're in the people business, he said. This is perfectly fine. They chatted with fellow patrons over drinks, a stout for Zuckerberg and a mocktail for Chan, who would announce her pregnancy 2 weeks later, and Zuckerberg gamely took a shot of Alabama whiskey with the bar owners. Anything but tequila, he pleaded when offered. Around midnight, they left, and they had to be up early next morning for church. In nearly every state he's visited, Zuckerberg has attended religious services or met with religious leaders. In Texas, he drank coffee with pastors. In Minnesota, he ate iftar dinner with Somalian refugees. In Charleston, he ate dinner with the entire cast of a walk-into-a-bar joke, the reverend, rabbi, police chief, mayors, and heads of local nonprofits. The next day, he visited Mother Emanuel AME, where white supremacist Dylan Roof killed 8 parishioners and the church's pastor in 2015. Asked by a Facebook commenter last year if he was an atheist, Zuckerberg replied, "No, I was raised Jewish, and then I went through a period where I questioned things, but now I believe religion is very important." It was a telling way to put it. Publicly, at least, his interest in religion seems to be more sociological than existential. After attending services at Amwell Baptist Church in Mobile, he wrote on Facebook about how the church provides an important social structure for the community. This has generally been the theme for the trip. How does this whole community thing work? And if you're looking for an example of a powerful and enduring community that supersedes geographical territory, ethnic heritage, or class interest, religion offers a particularly fascinating case study. The Muslim Ummah united Arab tribes and non-Arabs in a universal community of believers. The Catholic Church was both a rival and a complement to state power, providing essential services and legitimizing the governance of kings and emperors almost entirely through the force of shared values. What shared values might Facebook enforce? Zuckerberg's own personal values, such as his admirable commitment to immigration activism, tend to align with what's good for Facebook. It would be difficult to think of a better real-life representative of the globalists bemoaned by Breitbart and other hyper-nationalist outlets than Zuckerberg, but his platform has also been those publications' greatest assets in distributing their message. Zuckerberg's commitment to liberalism and to not alienating wide swaths of his user base is deep enough that when Facebook was accused of suppressing conservative news, he met in person with conservative media figures to assure them Facebook was committed to giving them a voice. Which may explain why, in building global community, Zuckerberg hesitates when he tries to lay out a foundational value system for the community he's helping to build. The guiding principles, he writes, are that the community standards should reflect the cultural norms of our community, that each person should see as little objectionable content as possible, and each person should be able to share what they want while being told they cannot share something as little as possible. That is, the guiding principle should be whatever encourages people to post more. Facebook's actual value system seems less positive than recursive. Facebook is good because it creates community. Community is good because it enables Facebook. The values of Facebook are Facebook. In late September, Zuckerberg apologized for being initially dismissive about the problem of misinformation, but insisted Facebook's broader impact on politics was more important. He's probably right, but I'm not sure he should want to be. What happens to politics when what he calls our social infrastructure is refashioned by Facebook's? The last election gives us a hint. In February of 2016, the media theorist Clay Shirky wrote about Facebook's effects. Reaching and persuading even a fraction of the electorate used to be so daunting that only two national organizations, the two major national political parties, could do it. Now, dozens can. It used to be, if you wanted to reach hundreds of millions of voters on the right, you needed to go through the GOP establishment. But in 2016, the number of registered Republicans was a fraction of the number of the daily American Facebook users, and the cost of reaching them directly was negligible. Trump was able to create a political coalition of disaffected Democrats, maybe, and rabid right-wing Republicans because the parallel civic infrastructure of social media, and Facebook in particular, meant he had no obligation to Republican orthodoxy. Or take the reorganized civic infrastructure of political advertising, suddenly brought to light by the announcement that Russian government-linked accounts and pages had purchased $100,000 worth of ads, reportedly highlighting divisive issues and promoting spoiler candidates like Jill Stein. That's going to ring some bells. What effect that money might have had on last year's election remains totally unclear. The amount spent and the number of ads sold, roughly 3,000, could indicate a potential audience anywhere from a few 100,000 to scores of millions. Well, we now have some data on that. The best case scenario is that it was largely a frivolous experiment, a way for the infamous Kremlin-connected troll farm, the Internet Research Agency, to quietly test the effects of paid placement. The nightmare possibility is that the money was spent strategically in an effort to selectively target swing voters with specific interests in important electoral districts, white working-class Obama voters in Michigan who joined anti-immigrant Facebook groups, say, pushing divisive issues that encouraged or discouraged certain voting patterns. Few people know how the money was used or where, because Facebook has declined so far to identify the inauthentic accounts or Facebook pages to whom they say they targeted. Until Zuckerberg's September announcement, the company had insisted that sharing further data with Congress or the public could violate U.S. privacy laws. Facebook did, after reportedly receiving a search warrant, share the data with federal investigators looking into collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. The policy changes announced by Zuckerberg in September represent an effort at self-regulation. Facebook's way of saying, trust us, we can handle ourselves. But this isn't a particularly appealing pitch. Facebook has been wrong often. It spent most of the year insisting that it had sold no political ads to Russian actors. Twice in the past year, it's admitted misreporting metrics to advertisers. Earlier in September, ProPublica discovered that it was possible to purchase ads targeted at self-described Jew haters. Maybe more important, it's not clear why we'd imagine that Facebook's interests are the same as the U.S. government's. This was what felt so unnerving about Zuckerberg's September announcement. As with all things Facebook, it opened itself up to multiple interpretations, depending on the angle from which you caught it. Rotate one way and it's an admirable and much-needed statement of commitment and responsibility from a powerful but ultimately positive corporation. Rotate another, and it's an assurance to state leaders of Facebook's continuing commitment to the sovereignty of nation-states, no matter how global its actual network is. Now, Mr. Prime Minister, we understand your little borders are very important to you. Rotate further, and it's a declaration that Facebook is assuming a level of power at once of the state and beyond it, as a sovereign, self-regulating suprastate entity within which states themselves operate. Planetary technical systems like Facebook, David Banks, a SUNY Albany professor who studies large technical systems, told me, don't want to be in an environment. Natural, legal, political, social. They want to be the environment. Facebook, this announcement seemed to imply, was like an environment in which democracy takes place, a natural force not unlike democracy itself. Lots more to come here. We can't fit it all in. I encourage you to read it, analyze it. Maybe we'll discuss it in what I put together for the Monday show, but I did promise you, and I do intend to deliver the next installment of Paula Appanese' continuing series on GOP as domestic abusers. We can just about fit that in before we cut out for the show. So, Paula, you're on. Can you roll?
The Domestic Abuse Cycle, a Framework for Our Politics and a Path Forward, Part 5. In Part 1, I introduced my premise: the GOP uses tactics against Democrats that mirror the behavior of domestic abusers, creating a warped environment. In Part 2, I gave examples of these tactics, and in Part 3, described the ineffective response by Democrats. In Part 4, I talked about how the media amplifies rather than evaluates GOP abuses, and how Democrats need to recognize this dynamic. Today I'm going to begin discussing how Democrats can move from a defensive to an offensive position. Now, let's start with the Donald Trump factor. Republican abuse culminated in the appalling presidency of Donald Trump. Trump and his fanatical base is the monster the GOP created, but now can't control. The Trump machine took the Republican abuse playbook, ratcheted it up to 11, and now alternates between turning it on Democrats and on the Republican establishment. Republicans didn't budget for that, and the GOP media machine is sputtering. During the Obama administration, having clear targets, President Obama, Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, kept the GOP leadership focused, but problems were festering outside the Beltway. Republican obstruction pleased the base, but it didn't solve problems affecting their lives, and media outlets like Breitbart News began attracting hard-right Republicans. Other fissures between evangelicals, libertarians, and, quote, moderate Republicans kept the party from finding a clear frontrunner during the Republican primaries. Trump squeaked through, and the GOP leadership chose to back him, however reluctantly, with the hopes that they would both manage him and enjoy a legislative windfall. But Trump's antics have exacerbated the pre-existing cracks in the GOP monolith. Republican leaders don't know from day to day what they're supposed to be for or against, and their justifications for Trump's exploits are increasingly untenable. Trump's campaign to delegitimize the media has created its own backlash, and media disgust with Republican weaseling is at an all-time high. Meanwhile, Trump's administration motivated Democrats nationwide to resist, and citizen resistance stiffened the spines of Democratic leaders. It's the perfect time for a reboot. Democrats as champions. If Democrats can understand the abuse environment that we're enmeshed in and reject enabling response patterns, we can transition from beleaguered defenders to champions for Americans. We have always had Democratic fighters and Democratic victories, but problems within our party weren't recognized. Crucially, on the economic front, Democrats absorbed the beliefs conservatives have spent years pumping into the body politic. Democrats had no competing think tanks, no ALEC writing legislation for state representatives nationwide. Economic policy offerings from both parties were filtered through conservative frames. The most fundamental conservative frame is that monetary gains must be pushed upward versus shared. The result has been severe income inequality, widespread wage stagnation, and increasing financial insecurity for most Americans. Republicans succeeded because they had a few simple ideas, trickle-down economics, deficits are bad, etc., and they have pushed them consistently for decades. Democrats didn't promote any ideas consistently, didn't coordinate messaging, didn't create institutions to perform liberal idea research and development. Democrats mistakenly assumed that Americans understood what Democrats stand for, understood the value of the New Deal, understood how democracies work. But all the while, Republicans were actively undermining those assumptions. We've done better on social issues, in part because activists drove and Democratic leaders followed. So while we have won many battles, we have been losing the war. The combination of Republican single-mindedness and Republican abusiveness has been hugely successful in terms of offices won and legislation passed. If you measure success by positive effects on the country, however, the GOP victories are Pyrrhic. The problem has been Democratic misreading of the terrain. While Democrats fought countless separate skirmishes, the Republicans were marching in lockstep across the land, contaminating the political environment. Metaphorically, Democrats have been upholding the Geneva Conventions while Republicans discarded them. That's actually true in real life. It's time to demand decent standards of political behavior. Setting standards. Democrats need to recapture the idea that we have a right to hold and act on our political beliefs without being demonized, coerced, or threatened. We also have a right to vote with the expectation that our voting systems will be fair, secure, and protected from interference. We have a right to expect honesty and transparency from our elected and appointed leaders. We have a right to a fair playing field where the rules are known and obeyed by everyone. We have a right to a seat at the table when policies that will affect us are being considered. All citizens have these rights. In a healthy political environment, people can present their positions without fear. Debates can be passionate without hostility, and leaders can work together to find optimal solutions to problems, blending the best elements of multiple viewpoints. Republican abuses conflict with these rights, and that is the context through which they should be countered. Next up, some specific messaging and tactical suggestions for Democratic office holders and seekers and activists, pundits, etc.
Thank you, Paula. Always interesting, and we eagerly await practical application of everything that we've been discussing. But what a day it's been. I know I felt a little bit bad about interrupting this fantastic article. Of course, I'll give you the links to it so you can finish. But I didn't want to interrupt the flow of Paula's continuing series here. We'll have more for you. But the fact that I didn't get through the rest of this article, and there wasn't really that much more now, motivates me to begin to record for Monday, so maybe it's not a bad thing altogether. Some great points made at the very end of the article, and really can tie in to a number of other themes that are bubbling up in progressive circles, including the renewed interest in antitrust law that the sheer size of Facebook, the article notes, has made possible and I guess garnered support for. Really just kind of amazing, and also an interesting observation here about, as he says, from one angle, the Facebook hypercube terrifies me, but from another, it's a tool with which I have a tremendous and affectionate, intimate bond. I have 13 years of memories stored on Facebook. Stuff like the first photo ever taken of me and my partner together is there, somewhere deep in an album posted by someone I haven't talked to in years. Kind of an interesting reminder of what Facebook is to lots of people, many people, most of its users. Anyway, time for us to hand over the microphones and get ready to record our Monday show. It is now time for the after show, the Angle of Repose Friday after show, in which they have stories including the following. A Massachusetts high school punished several teachers for discussing anti-Semitism with their students after the school was vandalized with swastikas. Recovery statistics on Puerto Rico water and power have mysteriously disappeared from FEMA's website. We need Facebook to save us on that one. And when we talk about mass deportation, we're talking about 4 million Latin American children suddenly without parents or a house to live in. Don't forget it. We won't let you.
From
They won't
Daily
either.
Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
Just wanted to let you know that the world, the planet itself, the physical planet's okay, except for, well, thousands of dead leopard sharks with brains eaten away by a rare amoeba washing up on California beaches. But the Trump administration has inexplicably defunded research into that anomaly. That and so much more on the After Show next. We'll see you Monday.